please welcome editors Christopher Donaldson and Roslyn, Kalloo, and costume designer Quita, Alfred, production designer Peter Cosco, and cinematographer Luc Montpellier. You're right next to me, Luc.
Uh-oh.
Welcome.
No pressure.
When I introduced the film, I mentioned that you were involved, that you'd done all of Sarah's films previous, and the fact that you were involved in the thematic material while the script was being developed, which is actually rare in cinema to have the cinematographer included so early in the process. Can you tell us about the approach that Sarah wanted with you with the film? In particular, the fact that it has a big scope. It was shot in 17 millimeter. Yeah.
No, that's perfect. That's great. Yeah, I've shot all of Sarah's narrative films since Away From Her. She had done one documentary that I didn't do, which I wish I would have, but you can't always do it. She was making stories we tell while we were shooting Take This Waltz. But yes, I've had a long history with Sarah. You know, when you meet somebody that you have a shorthand, I actually shot in one of her short films. That's where we met many years ago, for like over 22 years ago. So when you start, you know, when you connect with someone as a filmmaker, you kind of just know it and you feel it. And Sarah definitely has a collaboration like no other director I've worked with. And, you know, every time Sarah's done a film, she's challenged you in a different way, and also in the making of that. So Women Talking is kind of the culmination of probably the hardest film we've had to make. It's about questioning the patriarchy, and that's a very big subject for everyone. And, you know, you can relate this story to what's happening today. And that, I think, was kind of a slight coincidence, but it's also been something that's been existing. And the women in the film are trying to reinvent their future, and the whole debate around what they're going to do resonates today. So to me, whenever Sarah writes a draft of a script, I'm fortunate enough to get an early draft, and she has select people she sends it to kind of get feedback as a writer. And, you know, I'm lucky to be one of those people. So whenever she hands me a script, she always will say one or two sentences that are very abstract, but that set us in a track in a very abstract way.
Why did she tell you about this film?
Well,
that was the
right.
abstract notes that she gave
Well, you know what? It was probably the most abstract because we knew how much work we had ahead to figure out the themes. I mean, Miriam's book is very much, has all the themes from our story. It's just the world is different in a filmic world as opposed to a literary one. Sarah handed me the first draft and she said, I want the images of the film to feel as epic as the decisions that these women have to make in the film. So, in other words, it was another way, knowing I was the cinematographer, that I needed to figure out the language photographically, hence the choices we've made, which I'm sure we could talk about. And, you know, we wanted an image that was very heavy in its conformity, very much like the society, hence the desaturated palette and the widescreen. I wanted you to feel every pore in someone's face, every blade of grass. I wanted it to be, because it wasn't never meant to be a period film. We just wanted to confuse you as to what time of in history this was. And until you see the truck driving in, a lot of people are still questioning, and then the song kicks in from the 60s. You're like, what's happening here? But that was the point, that we didn't want you to feel like you were distanced from the history of this, the horrible events that this is kind of inspired from, that Miriam wrote her book and the film is being made, happened not too long ago. So I think, you know, Sarah and I talked a lot about, we didn't want the distance, but we also didn't want to not use the photography to draw you in and make you feel a certain way. So.
Correct. I mean, can you tell us, I mean, you mentioned the desaturation of the film. When I saw the film, what I loved about it is that it has kind of like a fable quality to it. You guys could have gone into like a documentary style. Instead, you keep us somewhere in, not a historical drama, not a period piece, not a something stylized. There is this wonderful in-between, fable-like look.
I wish that's a perfect word that Sarah uses all the time when talking about the film. The idea of the fable, that it's from female imagination, like the quote says at the beginning. It sets you in a tone of, as you say, not documentary, because we could never do justice. The original events happened in South America. So we made decisions to try to make it, using the Mennonite culture as simply an example of a timelessness, that people that have made a conscious choice to not look at the future until these women start deciding that for themselves, which was a very important thing. And every decision we made, if you notice in the film, the women control everything, from the doors opening and closing in the loft to, when they take a break. And that, to me, I'm quite proud of, that the women actually control the filmmaking in a lot of ways.
There is a light shift throughout the film, which actually adds urgency to the storytelling. Tell us, from your vantage point, the challenges of having to shoot, keeping track of the light.
That's right. No, that's a very good question. For me, light is a character in the film. No, it's typical to say that from a cinematographer, but in this film especially, Sarah's script was extremely precise as to what time of day certain scenes happen, because there's a ticking clock element to the whole film, that you needed to feel like the light was shifting throughout the film, because the men could arrive at any minute. So it was meant to be a bit of a tension element, that it's subtle. And they even say in the film, like, we have to make a decision, and can't you see the sun is gone? So then they start discussing again. So to me, I was excited to make it a character in the film, as a tension element in the film. So I literally designed, with Sarah in mind, and these scenes that were playing at sunset and into dusk, very much designed exactly where the sun was going to be. I spent an entire day on location of Peter's great set, where Peter essentially built the entire colony. Those entire exteriors are all built and designed by Peter, and we worked very heavily to do that. But the time-ticking thing was a very important thing, so that hopefully you felt that tension by the time the light disappears and then the lanterns turn on. There's a bit of a campfire feeling, of all the women discussing, and then ultimately ends up to the next day. So it was a challenge to do.
There is
Luke, you should also mention that it's a blue screen movie.
Right.
It's every shot in the loft is a VFX shot.
That is true. Like, I'll just talk about that a bit. Thank you. It was important to Sarah and I that we could give control over the set to the actors. Because, obviously you see these massive scenes of very emotional moments and 20-page scenes that were, imagine if we had to break those up by going to shoot at Magic Hour on location, but then come back to a set. So we made the decision early so that we can control and also literally freeze time, because Magic Hour and Sunset only last for half an hour. So it was important to me as a cinematographer, as much of designing things visually with Sarah, that the actors had this amazing space that they could just inhabit, to allow, because I knew Sarah was going to push them into going into places that were really challenging. So the whole barn was built on a stage by Peter, and we surrounded it with 270 degrees of blue screen, and then I had all of this literally different times of day programmed outside, so that we can literally hit a button and then it would change, but then the actors in between takes, or if we were turning around, wouldn't lose where they were. And I was really worried about that. So it's funny, as a cinematographer, you're very connected to the actors as well, and the tone, and even the people you hire. And Sarah would, I'm sure, say the same thing. Yeah.
There was one moment that I want to ask you, how did it happen? It's stunning, is where Salome's daughter falls asleep and the sun is setting. Was that planned? Was that a coincidence? Tell us about that moment.
Well, that was all done in stage. It was all done virtually, but no, that was very much planned. I call that scene the visual climax of the film. To talk about the time shifting, that to me is exactly where things climax, as far as the day has disappeared. Now it's really getting tense because they could arrive anytime. So we wanted to play with time there and kind of suspend reality a bit as, and again, what's special about that scene is these women know they could get caught any minute, but as soon as little Meep comes in, Salome's daughter, everything stops. And they don't care if they get caught or not. It's the care of the child is the first thing.
And the future of the child.
That is correct. You're constantly after an intense scene, always going back to the children. We were very conscious of giving you a breath as the camera drifts out to kind of show what they're fighting for. And to me, Sarah, that's what's so great about her humanity is she's aware that real life is like that. Even though it's a fable, even though some people would say it's theatrical, she wanted to bring humanity to it. So that scene was all done in a stage against blue screen, and I spent months designing it with Sarah, but it needed to be right. And again, a film like this, people are surprised that we used blue screen, and to me, the proud moment is when no one knows, because it's not supposed to be highlit. But that moment is probably the moment we went a bit as surreal as possible. I think we allowed ourselves to do it because everything gets ramped up by that point where they start going around to the colony and kind of saying, we're leaving at dawn, so you better get moving. So.
And last question before I move on to Peter, but I just want to address the white elephant in the room, is that this movie is called Women Talking, but then, you know, and Sarah is directing, but she brings in a male DP. Were you conscious of that? Were you concerned about that issue?
I was. I mean, Sarah and I go back so far that every film to me is new, and we talked about it. I actually brought it up with Sarah. I said, maybe I should step back on this one. Do you want to have a female cinematographer based on the point of view? And one simple thing she told me, and again, the movie has these hard conversations, so it's like life imitating art. But I wanted to hit it off right off the top because I respect her so much. And she said, Luke, this film's about everyone. It's not just about women. It's about men. Ben Wishaw's character is a good man in the film, and he's there to listen. That's what I told my crew, because we had a lot of male crew members on the film. And I told everyone, this film, our job is to listen and to be receptive, especially in the film industry, is being run by a lot of men, and the rules have been created. And I know Sarah, not to speak for her, but it was important for her that it was a very family-friendly set. That, you know, Rooney's daughter, the young baby, was on set often, and she was basically, we would always give her time to go and nurse her kid, and it was just a really kind of family-oriented thing. So they are really trying to change the rules of how films are made, because men benefit from that too. I want to go see my family at a reasonable hour. I don't want to be... So all of that was being questioned, and we had this amazing collective of people that were willing to challenge what the status quo. I have a 14-year-old daughter. I want a better future. I would always think about her when I was making the film and how can I help? And the film needs to be seen by males as much as females. Like, we all have to have that conversation. And that's what I hope the film does, is that it continues that conversation, and it's not always going to be comfortable. So to answer that question, I was comfortable with Sarah, but we have this shorthand, and the fact that there was an entry point that way, that she allowed me to, it's what exactly I needed to hear to say, but I needed to give her the option to do it in the spirit of the film.
Well, thank you. Peter, the design, I love there was a cathedral feel to the hayloft. Can you talk about the design of the
Well, yeah, that was a really important aspect to it. I mean, you know, like talking with Sarah and Luke very early on, before we'd even started scouting, you know, we were talking about that this takes place in the hayloft and the barn and what it should look like. And a gambreled roof barn like that gave us, you know, like maximum height and a big work area. And it had, like you said, I mean, you kind of nailed it on the head, that cathedral quality. And even, you know, like the fact that it's on, they're talking on a hayloft, you know, they're kind of between
they're elevated.
Heaven and earth. They're just kind of suspended, you know, like in limbo, as it were, you know. So that was a big, important part of the approach to the hayloft, the barn, what all those elements would look like when they came together.
You know, tell us about the wash house, which it's so beautiful in the sense that we watched them use the wash house, but then also there's a gorgeous scene between Rooney Mara and Ben Whishaw, which is on the roof with the sky. Tell us about creating that space and building it.
Yeah, I think your questions are amazing because it's like you hit them all on the head. Because
You watched the movie.
No, but I mean, like there was, like the barn is obviously like the big set. But I think the wash house was our favorite set. Like in the art department and set deck, the wash house was our little gem, And I think at one point when the week of hell, when we were, had to reduce the budget, there was some talk about whether we really needed the wash house, and I said, yeah, we do. And
That's Sarah's term, by the way, the week of hell, where we all had to slash our budgets.
But that was not only did it create, I think it really helped create a sense of the colony and the communal living that, there's a wash house that everybody, in that section of the colony would go and utilize. It gave a sense of community like that. But also it was I think kind of like a small little landmark for, situating yourself in the colony and, its relationship to other things. And it allowed us to, include other little elements like the water tank on the tower, and of course the roof, which was, like a really crucial scene. But then there's also, when we started filming, it served a very practical logistical purpose. When we were doing the scene of everybody getting ready to leave and the horses all lined up, the wash house provided a great place for video village and something where people could hide behind. So
Let's
that
reenact it, Peter.
Yeah, everybody
200
was
people like this in the
crammed
shade.
in there. Yeah. So but that was a set we were all very proud of, and that I think really helped create the sense of community.
So people understand is that the hayloft, it was built in a studio, but then you also had, you were in a farm as well, the outdoors. Can you walk us through it?
Yeah, we scouted, for I don't know, a number of weeks, and then we found this farm a little bit northeast of Toronto, and it had all the elements that we were looking for, and I think probably the main thing was that it was like just beautiful vistas everywhere you looked, and with the gently rolling hills and some wood lines in the background. And it also had this barn that was pretty much identical to the dimensions of the SketchUp model that we'd been using to discuss and plan things up to that point. So it seemed like a great fit. The problem was that the interior of the barn didn't really work. And from very early on, I think, Luke and I probably discussed this, and, like Sarah as well, it just seemed natural to me that you would want to do the interior barn scenes in a set on stage so that you could control the time of day. I think there's something Sarah said where, we put the sun where we wanted it. And but even just for the practicality of, the actors and being in a controlled environment where, you didn't have to worry about the elements, and, like if it's raining and you hear it on the roof and people walk in with muddy feet and all that sort of stuff, it was just seemed like the obvious thing to do, to build it in the stage. And by building it in the stage, we were able to build the hayloft the size that we wanted, reduce, practically all the posts that a barn would normally have, so that allowed Luke freedom to light from any position without worrying about shadows, and Sarah could block the actors. There's one beautiful thing, picking up on what Luke had said about like the women kind of controlling that space. Early on, when they start talking, they kind of create their own set by taking bales of hay or pails or like busted stools and kind of creating this circle where they're going to be discussing their future. And that was it was great to be able to have a hayloft that was big enough to allow them to do that, because I mean, haylofts aren't usually as big as the one that we had planned, and we made sure that there was enough head height, and it had, you know, like all the elements for like, to go up into the rafters, and, oh no, it's oche. That goes up into the rafters, and
And Peter designed these great hatches, like the whole roof. There were sections of the roof
yeah, I forgot
that
about
could
that.
open up, and I could drop lights in, again, to service the actors without bringing equipment on the set all the time. So the entire roof, there were sections that opened up, and I had lights on pulleys that could come in to just turn around very quickly.
Yeah,
So
so
again,
there's-
we had 2 cameras, and so we worked very closely to design that to be practical, but also creatively, obviously needed to serve our purpose. I just thought
no, that's great, because I completely forgot about that. But yeah, there was huge sections of the roof that were hinged, so we just, you know, cranked them up, and you'd get your legs in position, and it made for really smooth shooting experience. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Peter. And let's bring on costume designer Quita, Alfred. When I was watching the film, I love the fact that I was able to tell every family by subtle things you did with the costume design. For example, like brighter colors for the Fresson family, flowery, they were flowy touches to the Lewin family, and then Scarface and her family was darker tones. You know, can you tell us about that approach and the logic behind that approach?
Well, I'm so glad you noticed that, for one thing. Thank you. But we had so few details to work with because the costumes are authentic. We based our community on Russian Mennonite colonies, and my research was specifically Russian Mennonite. There are
And you
different
grew
types
up close to a Mennonite.
I did. I grew up in southern Manitoba, in Winnipeg, but very close to where Marion Taves grew up, actually. And I was familiar with Mennonite culture all my childhood growing up. It's part of the southern Manitoba quilt, as it were. Everybody's from somewhere, except the indigenous people who have been there longer than all of us, and everybody's culture is celebrated there. So it was not unfamiliar to plain dress as a term. It was not unfamiliar to me. You can walk into just about any grocery store or Walmart in southern Manitoba and see women dressed the way they are in our film. Although this community is considerably more conservative than many that still exist in Manitoba are. But the fact is that the women, particularly in a conservative community as conservative as this one, have very few choices about, obviously, as we found out, about their bodies, about their lives. And although we don't mention Mennonite, that was our reference. So there are very few details to tell a story with.
And no pockets.
And no pockets. No pockets. What woman with 10 children, 5 of them under 5, wants to wear a dress with no pockets? But there are no pockets. They are a place for...
Why do you think that choice of no pockets?
They're a place for idle hands. And women should not be idle, should not be engaged in any activity that takes them away from their focus on their faith and and anything that might take them away from their place in the hierarchy of a particular society. They are below God, definitely below the men in their communities, often, as Greta says, below the animals. The women they have the least. And I say this as no judgment on any particular religion or culture, because we know that these facts are true in many societies. In our society, in the one we were using as a reference for our film, there are so few things that are available to the women, including pockets, including ostentation of any sort, including accessories. So we had to tell the story, we had to break it down into mood and personality and see how we could tell that story with as little as possible. Sometimes limitations are a good thing for creativity, I think. And
like I was noticing that the older characters tend to have darker tones.
Yes, that's traditional too. That is traditional. A matron is expected to be less ostentatious than even the younger ones, if you can imagine being less ostentatious than the women in our show, in our film. But yes, that's traditional for matrons to wear.
But it's a credit to your design that I was able to notice all these different nuances in political things based on your design, which highlights what you just said, that within your limitations, you were able to get creative.
Thank you. It helped me to decide, and I was able, very early, Luke did some camera tests with his daughter Sophie for me on the farm that we were filming on, and I sent out some actual Swiss Mennonite dresses to him that I had found in southern Manitoba. They did camera tests and then also desaturated the footage for me so that I could see what would survive that desaturation, what patterns. Sometimes something we thought was going to be fantastic would either, there would be too much contrast in the pattern once it had been desaturated. Sometimes texture would completely disappear. So that was a huge help early on. And then for my own edification, and eventually to aid my work, I divided the families, as you described, into moods. Whereas the Friesens were, and I often say this about the two families who speak the most, essentially, in our film, it was a choice between intellect and instinct as far as their reactions, and neither is better than the other. The Friesens, I chose purer colors and more intellect-based ideas, linear patterns, pure blues, pure purples, repeating patterns, and then the Lowens, as you noticed, had more natural colors, colors we would find, all colors are in nature, but greens, browns, rusts for them, and more flowing patterns to somehow subliminally suggest the turmoil that was within that family, because there was a lot boiling beneath the surface, as we know, with Marie Kay and her and Auche and their experience, and Greta's denial of what was happening to her daughter. There was a lot of unspoken business in that family. And then, excuse me, as you notice, Scarface's family, they were the most, I always make this gesture to like a vice with my hands, because to me, her colors needed to be those of dried blood and of rust and of immovability, if that's a word. I'm not sure if it is, but immobility, I guess.
We understand.
So they were the most closely tied to tradition and unwilling to shift from that, unlike the other women. They were bound. So those colors spoke to me of things that would bind a psyche.
Wow, it's a terrific work. Yeah. And Quita, how much collaboration did you have with the actors? Did they have any?
Lots. It was fantastic. This was the best.
Did they balk about wearing all that polyester?
Oh my goodness.
Because 99% polyester?
Oh no, it's 100, my friend. 100%, except for Mayle's dress, which was rayon. And the only reason that pattern made it in, because Sarah and I just loved that piece of fabric, and we were going to hang it over, we were going to give it to Peter and hang in a set if it didn't make it into a dress, because there's something about that piece that we loved. But the reaction to those polyester dresses was fascinating. And it ran the spectrum, every kind of reaction you can imagine. And I've said before, they were those dresses, and I tried real ones that I bought in the Mennonite community on the actors before we started to replicate the ones we needed for the principals. And it ran the gamut between an acting exercise and a therapy session. Because some put those dresses on and went, oh, I get it now, I see. Sheila McCarthy in particular, I'll never forget her reaction. You could just see all the pieces coming together when she looked at herself in the mirror, and it was so rewarding and such an honor to watch that happen. And we put one of the real ones on her first. Some, for the young girls, I think both of them, I think this is the case, neither had ever had a professional fitting. So to them, in the bloom of youth, those were pretty pleated dresses with flowers on them. And there were both girls who don't often wear dresses. So they had a completely different reaction of their own. There were other reactions. People, you could get glimpses of things that the actors were dealing with, maybe in their personal life or in their family life or in their own minds, and every reaction was different. But the one constant was the 100% polyester.
What about the white socks?
Oh,
The white socks are.
Everyone's favorite.
I love the white socks. Again, the highest compliment I could have had, I think I've had so far, was Miriam coming on set and saying, "Oh my God, the white socks, the white socks," because they're accurate, and the fact that she loved them and she recognized them from her childhood and her experience in the Mennonite community, it was such a compliment to me. I was really pleased. But they utterly, and men and women in traditional Russian Mennonite communities, entirely embrace the socks and sandals life. Absolutely, and without question, both. So the fact, and they were comfortable for the actors, which was great. We were on the parts of the dusty roads. It helped to keep stones out of people's socks, or out of their feet, out of their sandals, but those were, the grubbier the socks and the shoes, the better, as far as I was concerned.
But besides the fact that you grew up so close to this community, you still relied on your research and also cultural consultants.
I did, and the two angels in my life last summer, and still, because they're still my friends, Esther Jansen and Marianne Hildebrand, were my cultural consultants. Marianne, it's as in all things in Manitoba, was 2 phone calls away from somebody I knew. Let me call my mom's friend so-and-so. Okay, well, she'll call. Okay, you're having coffee with her next week, and you're going down, and she's going to take you shopping, and she's going to introduce you to Mrs. Lowen and Mrs. Penner and Mrs. who have fabric shops, who are going to sell you the authentic thing, and then you're going to a yard sale, and you're going to buy all this person's old clothing that they don't wear now because they've modernized their lives. So that was the most magnificent gift to be given, to have people open their heritage to me, essentially. I thought I was familiar with the Mennonite culture, but I certainly was not. And it's very important, I know certainly to the Mennonites in Manitoba, but I have a feeling to most people in Mennonite faith and in culture. Genealogy is very important to them, and family history, and so there are all kinds of magnificent documents with pictures and lineages and stories about how their family came from whichever place they came and what they looked like when they came, and here's the family photo, and here's how they, here's what they kept of, here's my grandmother's dress. So I had that in Manitoba, and then Marianne in Manitoba connected me with her childhood friend. They were both from Winkler, Manitoba, which is south of Winnipeg, and is still a very conservative Mennonite community. Both of these women are modern as you and I are. But Marianne hooked me up with Esther, who lives in southeastern Ontario, near, there are Russian Mennonites in southwestern, did I say eastern? Southwestern Ontario. But there are also Swiss Mennonites and different sects of Russian Mennonite. So she lived out there, and she works in community services. So she deals with families exactly like the ones in our story, who travel back and forth from South America, who have relatives here or there. So I had access to hats. I had a lady who knew how to do the ribbons on the hats. I had somebody who knew how to sew Schlaubechsen, which are the overalls. It was like, here, what do you need? Let me make a call all the time.
Great.
It was brilliant, the help. And
Well,
the
it's
kindness.
terrific work you've done, Quita. Thank you so much. Now to the editors, Christopher and Roslyn. I'm curious about the narrator in your story, and how did that come about?
Well, initially, as in the novel, it was August narrating the events of the film, and it stayed like that for a while, probably up until one of the director cuts versions. And then somebody had, I think it was Chris actually, had a really great idea about shifting the narration onto Ocha to see how that would open things up more, create more empathy. Maybe Chris can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, excuse me. Any edit is really just a process of sort of integrating your assumptions, and that was the assumption for a very long time, that the narrator would be the narrator of the novel. And Ben Wishaw's performance was incredible and made you cry, but eventually, as we were struggling, quite frankly, and the realization that this amazing thing is actually holding us back. Because his narration could only form one kind of tone and one kind of investigation of the material. It was always the women. He could never say I. He could never say us. And so then when we thought, what about that girl in the background, the film all of a sudden took on a life.
But Christopher, just so we understand, the film had already been shot.
Totally.
And
Totally,
then
yeah.
There's
it
a
was
lot of-
through the editorial process that you guys came up, had that epiphany.
Yeah.
There's an awful lot of footage of Ben writing at that desk.
Yeah.
It was a joke on set, actually.
Yes.
Going back to the desk.
Go back, yeah, get back to the desk.
And and then once we did that, Sarah went off and basically wrote a stream of consciousness document, trying to find the voice, the new voice of the narrator. And we would then reinvestigate all the footage to find because of course it wasn't shot for Oucha to be the narrator, so we went and looked and found everything we possibly could, where we could sort of highlight her within the scenes. But ultimately, once we had that voice, we took this stream of consciousness document, and we would look at an idea and say, well, I think this idea of we saw ourselves from above could go here when she's coming down from the loft. And we'll take those shots that were from the end of the film, of the empty kitchens, which were there to represent the women left, and August left on the thing, and say, well, they have the emotional texture of that. Let's put them there, and they'll cut really nicely into the shot of Scarface Jan's, the only woman in her kitchen. And we started basically taking everything from everywhere and turning the film into itself. And that's the best way to describe it. That it wasn't until we found that voice that the film could really soar.
Amazing. Roslyn and Christopher, tell us the opening sequence. We never see violence visually, and we get short glimpses of the aftermath. Can you tell us about putting the opening moments together?
Well, similar to the novel, the film is really exploring the trauma of violence, and so we found it more powerful to keep those shots shorter and sharper, like short bursts, so that the audience can imagine, leave it in the realm of the imagination of the audience.
Yeah, no, I think Sarah was adamant that we have all seen enough poorly directed and manipulative, horrible scenes of rape, and she had no interest in filming that and no interest in portraying it in the film at all. So her depictions always start with the immediate aftermath of trauma.
And we shot them like that. We didn't.
Yeah.
There's not like extra footage of anything. Everything you see that's used, we shot. There's nothing extra. It was all decided very early by her.
And the story is very strongly about a response to violence, not
Correct.
the violence itself.
And Luke and I talked about the light and the urgency that brings to the story. Can you tell us from your end, what was it like modulating the light?
Well, I mean, light for us manifested in terms of a ticking clock, I guess is the best way to describe it. And we had this sort of pacing and structural imperative of basically two contradictory impulses, which is the same that the women have, which was one was to flee, which is just stop talking and leave. And then the other is to leave, which is to understand why we are leaving. But cinematically, they're actually kind of contradictory and fight each other. And so we had to come up with a way to make sure they were always feeding each other. A really good example of this is the women are very close to making a decision about, okay, what about the boys? 12, 13, and they're close, and it's very heightened. And then they go to speak to August about, are the boys safe? Can they come with us? And we actually completely gear down to a completely different emotional level and have this really beautiful poetic sequence about young boys. Traditionally in a film, when you want to raise tension, you just don't gear down. You just, let's drop that scene, and sometimes people say, can we just get through that really fast? But no, it was essential to maintain both pacing and structural imperatives, because if you didn't, that final release and the final shot where you were finally given over to your emotion would just not be the same thing.
And Roslyn and Christopher, Scarface, the character played by Frances McDormand, represents the women outside of the hayloft that are afraid to make a choice, and they just do the status quo. The character leaves halfway through the film, but we still feel her presence, and we see glimpses of her. Can you tell us about modulating that aspect of the story?
Well, initially, Scarface Jans got sprayed with the cow tranquilizer along with Aaron, and then they felt that was too strong and not appropriate. And instead, as the women are leaving, we go to Scarface Jans, watching them leave. She's the one that does nothing, and
yeah, and kind of gives sort of. In the original script, Salome kind of went on a spraying spree and got her and got the husband just to make sure.
That's right,
and we were taking that out because we felt she's going nuts with that spraying spree. But and so in the original script, therefore, her daughters were able to escape. But now the choice, which was a much more hopeful choice, we feel, was that she was able to let them go. So we actually found, Fran is such an extraordinary actor. We actually found a shot from when she was listening to the hymn before her daughters came out and put it there, and it had the right emotional texture for the choice. We had 3 or 4 different options, but Fran is just so emotionally committed to whatever moment, and takes on the color so much of what's around her that you have this feeling of, like she's letting her children go and loss, but it's from a completely different scene, so it's...
Last question to you all is, Sarah's not here with us, but I sense that there's this really strong collaborative energy with you guys. And Sarah, can you tell us about what is it like working with Sarah as a collaborator?
Excellent.
Yeah. Should I start?
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean,
Marvelous.
I think we'll have very different or similar ways of saying this. Yeah. I mean, from my history, Sarah does so much work to create a script and an environment. Oh, well, first of all, a script that she's confident in her themes. So she has this amazing ability to have this confidence in her themes, but also wanting to challenge them by collaborating and throwing it to us in our different departments, and definitely be able to play in the sandbox. It's her sandbox, but it's hers. We play in it, and we take her ideas, and to me, that's kind of a very responsible thing to do, because you're almost taking your ego out. She's an egoless person. We all have them, but she has a very good relationship with hers where I know what I'm doing, but I want to challenge everything. Yeah. Tell me if we can make this better. And then that is infectious. I know for me, it just makes you bring your A game. It makes you want, because she relies on you to play like that and to challenge ideas and to enhance it. We sat on this because it was COVID. We sat for months, in my 3rd floor office watching films and just discussing how we felt, our own lives. And Sarah meticulously shot lists everything, but then is willing to throw it away if an actor does something. Mm-hmm. We had amazing rehearsal periods to kind of figure that out with the cast and Pete in the set. And so I think it's a beautiful blend of confidence, but also questioning choices she has to for the audience, give it the best choice. No one's bigger than the film, but I also know she cares more about the people and how we make the film than the actual end product. And I think that's probably the best way to summarize it. She wants the experience to be almost at the top of the list of things. And I know she said, I'm not interested in making a film in duress or if it's not going to be like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the experience of working with Sarah is like none other. And I think that a big part of that is that, you know, if she chooses to work with you, it's because she has trust in your abilities and confidence that you could do the job that she's asked of you. And I think because of that, like just having somebody that trusts you, you know, makes you want to not disappoint her and not to do anything that's half-assed. You know, you go above and beyond what's required to bring, you know, as much to the project as she's bringing to it, you know, because, you know, she's extraordinarily, you know, well, she's an amazing person, intelligent, intuitive, committed, compassionate, just, you know, like there's, you know, like an endless stream of, you know, positive attributes. And like Luke was saying, I mean, creating an environment on set where everybody feels, you know, respected and listened to is, I think, a big part of how she approaches projects. I mean, this is my first project working with her as a director. I'd done a couple of things with her, that she acted in, but that was a long, long time ago. So it was just such a treat to get this opportunity.
Quita?
Luke and Peter have used most of the adjectives that I was going to use, so I'm going to have to
That's why I
think
wanted
up
to
some
go
new
first.
ones. Okay. Respect is a big one.
Yeah.
Trust, respect, confidence, and not only confidence in us, but enough confidence in herself to allow outside input and to allow new ideas and enough curiosity about the world and about other people, and such a brilliant, brilliant mind. And I'm the only one, I think, who can say I've known her since she was this high. And she was like that when she was that high. She's always been the most amazing, shining burst of light. But she, as Peter said, allowed us all to do our best. I think maybe Luke said it too. This experience was like none other, I think, for many of us, and we stopped saying we're never going to have this again, and we started saying we're only going to have this. So the bar has been, if I could jump up there and hold my hand way up there, that's where the bar is, if anybody's wondering. It's really, really high. So we hope to never have anything but this kind of experience now, because it's amazing. And that's all the way through, not just Sarah. That was our producers, the studios, with each other.
But listen to you all. What I was struck is the fact that the theme of the movie is like drove
Yeah, I want to add this. That, based on the history with Sarah, of knowing her for a long time, I've never seen her more determined to make this film. And there was a sense of fire and almost anger in a positive way to make this a part of the conversation. And it's the most, because I think it's the biggest film to try to make a comment on society that we've ever worked on. But there's this passion and determination that I'd not seen before. Like, that was always there, but it was extra high on this one. So I just
And the
thought
fact
I'd
that we're here, I'll let you guys, I promise, I'll let you have some adjectives.
I'm out of adjectives.
The fact that we're here talking to all of you instead of you all talking to only the stars of the movie is incredible and an unusual experience and wonderful
We love
for
it
us.
because to get this
That's
insight
Sarah, and
is
that's
so
Dee
rare.
Dee, and all of the people, the women that put this together, and that's the message that we want the world to have.
Yeah.
We had a fantastic time, and it works, and it's a nice way to work, and it makes beautiful art.
Yeah. Chris and Roslyn?
I'm out of adjectives, but I would say, I would add that she also always makes time to have some fun. She's very playful, and she has an extraordinary sense of humor, and so she insists that there be time set aside, even if it's a long day in the edit suite, to take a break and do some kickboxing and have some fun for 15 minutes or something. So she always makes room for that. And also I wanted to add that she's also very generous. We had our LA premiere on Thursday. She insisted that she not only bring up her amazing cast, but that we also come up to the stage. We were all introduced one by one, and also with mentioning what we contributed to the film. And she included us in the celebration of the LA premiere. So that just gives you a little bit of, what she's like.
Yeah, and I think growing up on a film set made her realize that, well, she has zero investment in the auteur theory. And if she was here, she'd probably take a few more shots at Orson Welles and the notion that there's just this one genius that does everything. And she would also probably insist that she has this philosophy that was spoken to her by a director she had worked with, Jaco van der Mel, which was essentially, if we look at a film, any work of art, like what is the absolute best result for that film? Maybe we move people and change people for a couple of weeks. But us together, we are together for months. And so therefore the only thing that matters is the experience that we have, and that's what we have to maintain and support and enrich. And she takes that philosophy from every moment to from the very beginning of pre-production to the very end till now. And it's inspiring, and I'm incredibly grateful to have the experience to share it with her
we're
and these people.
incredibly grateful to have you guys here.
Thank you.
Thank you
you
for
very
having
much.
us.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Spread the word on the film.